Welcome to our virtual gathering of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Stockton. We are glad you chose to visit us online today and hope that you will find here what you are seeking. Stockton is the most diverse city in the United States. Here at First Unitarian Universalist Church of Stockton, we are a community of individuals holding many different beliefs, coming from many different places, and each progressing on our own journeys of life and faith. We join together in our commitment to care for humanity and to shape a better, healthier, and more hopeful world. We promise to accept and encourage all those persons of goodwill who gather here, recognizing that we all continue to grow and learn throughout our lifetimes. We especially welcome and stand with LGBTQIA, Two Spirits Plus persons, even as we seek to welcome all persons of every age, every ability, every status, and every shade of skin pigment. We strive to make our community a place of peace and acceptance, love and nurture, even as we challenge ourselves and others to live more faithfully according to the values of Unitarian Universalism.
Opening words, number 188 in Lifting Our Voices, from Dina Maria Mulak Craik, adapted. Oh, the comfort, the inexpressible comfort of feeling safe with a person, having neither to weigh thoughts nor measure words, but pouring them all out just as they are, chaff and grain together, certain that a faithful hand will take and sift them, keep what is worth keeping, and then with the breath of kindness, blow the rest away. Chalice lighting. Grounding in our faith. In a time of uncertainty, when everything around us is changing constantly, each day new developments, rising numbers, changing guidelines, when the world we live in suddenly seems upside down and topsy-turvy, we light our chalice to remind ourselves of our grounding in our faith. We remember that the flaming chalice came into being as a beacon of hope during World War II, a secret symbol that offered help. In the midst of it all, we wrap ourselves in the warm light of the familiar flame, a reminder of the strength that emerges when we come together in community. By Reverend Alice Anichka Nasman. Words of affirmation led by our children. We believe in love. Love is the only doctrine of this church. We believe in truth. The quest for truth is our sacrament. We believe in helping others, and service is our prayer. We believe in the sacredness of life, to dwell together in peace, seek knowledge and freedom, serve humanity and fellowship, and cherish the earth and its creatures. This do we covenant, each with the other.
And now let us greet one another. We are not able to greet one another in person. However, we can send our loving thoughts to each other. We can recall all those that we know we would be laughing with, waving at and hugging, while crowding the aisles of the sanctuary, just to extend a hello to a dear friend or a welcome stranger. This greeting may be quieter and more reserved than what we are used to, but at least we don't have to worry that Reverend Bob will be ringing the cowbell to have us return to our seats. Once a month, First Unitarian Universalist Church of Stockton will be having a Zoom service, and we'll be able to see each other and extend our greetings both visually and vocally. Please join us then, and think of us now.
Our story for all ages is an excerpt from And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Fredrik Backman, translated from the Swedish by Alice Menzies into English. A boy and his grandpa are sitting on a bench in Grandpa's brain. "It's such a nice brain, Grandpa," Noah says encouragingly, because Grandma always said that whenever Grandpa goes quiet, you just have to give him a compliment to get him going again. "That's nice of you," Grandpa smiles and dries his eyes with the back of his hand. "A bit messy, though," the boy grins. "It rained for a long time here when your grandma died. I never quite got it back in order after that." No one notices that the ground beneath the bench has become muddy, but the keys and shards of glass are still there. Beyond the square is the lake, and small waves roll over it. Memories of boats already past. Noah can almost see the green tent on the island in the distance, remembers the fog which used to tenderly hug the trees like a cool sheet at dawn when they woke. Whenever Noah was scared of sleeping, Grandpa would take out a string and tie one end around his arm and the other around the boy's, and promise that if Noah had nightmares, he only had to pull on the string, and Grandpa would wake up and bring him straight back to safety. Like a boat on a jetty, Grandpa kept his promise every single time. Noah's legs dangle over the edge of the bench. The dragon has fallen asleep in the middle of the square, next to a fountain. There's a small group of tall buildings on the horizon on the other shore, amid the ruins of others which look like they've recently fallen down. The last ones standing are covered in blinking neon lights, strung here and there across their facades, like they were taped up by someone who was either in too much of a hurry or absolutely desperate for a poo. They wink patterns through the fog. Noah realizes forming letters. "Important," one of the buildings twinkles. "Remember," says another one. But on the very tallest building, the one closest to the beach, the lights say, "Pictures of Noah." "What are those buildings, Grandpa?" "They're archives. That's where everything is kept. All the most important things." "Like what?" "Everything we've done. All the photos and films and all your most unnecessary presents." Grandpa laughs. Noah too. They always give each other unnecessary presents. Grandpa gave Noah a plastic bag full of air for Christmas. And Noah gave Grandpa a sandal. For his birthday, Noah gave Grandpa a piece of chocolate He'd already eaten. That was Grandpa's favorite. That's a big building. It was a big piece of chocolate. Why are you holding my hand so tight, Grandpa? Oh, sorry, Noah. Sorry. The ground around the fountain in the square is covered in hard stone slabs. Someone has scrawled advanced mathematical calculations all over them in white chalk. But blurry people are rushing this way and that across them, and the soles of their shoes rub away the numbers one by one until only random lines remain, carved deeply into the stones. Fossil equations. The dragon sneezes in its sleep. Its nostrils send a million scraps of paper covered in handwritten messages flying across the square. 100 elves from a book of fairy tales Grandma used to read to Noah dance around the fountain trying to catch them. What's on those pieces of paper? The boy asks. Those are all my ideas, Grandpa replies. They're blowing away. They've been doing that for a long time. The boy nods and wraps his fingers tightly around Grandpa's. Is your brain ill? Why would you say that? Who told you that? Dad? Grandpa exhales through his nose, nods. We don't know, really. We know so little about how the brain works. It's like a fading star right now. Do you remember what I taught you about that? When a star fades, it takes a long time for us to realize, as long as it takes for the last of its light to reach Earth. Grandpa's chin trembles. He often reminds Noah that the universe is over 13 billion years old. Grandma always used to mutter, and you're still in such a hurry to look at it that you never have time to do the dishes. Those who hasten to live are in a hurry to miss, she sometimes used to whisper to Noah, though he didn't know what she meant before she was buried. Grandpa clasps his hands to stop them from shaking. When a brain fades, it takes a long time for the body to realize. The human body has a tremendous work ethic. It's a mathematical masterpiece. It'll keep working until the very last light. Our brains are the most boundless equation. And once humanity solves it, it'll be more powerful than when we went to the moon. There's no greater mystery in the universe than a human. Do you remember what I told you about failing? The only time you failed is if you don't try once more. Exactly, Noah, exactly. A great thought can never be kept on earth. Noah closes his eyes, stops the tears in their tracks, and forces them to cower beneath his eyelids. Snow starts to fall in the square, the same way very small children cry. Like it had barely started at first, but soon like it would never end. Heavy white flakes cover all of Grandpa's ideas. Tell me about school, Noah, the old man says. He always wants to know everything about school, but not like the other adults who only want to know if Noah is behaving. Grandpa wants to know if the school is behaving. It hardly ever is. Our teacher made us write a story about what we want to be when we're big, Noah tells him. What did you write? I wrote that I wanted to concentrate on being little first. That's a very good answer. Isn't it? Well, I would rather be old than a grown-up. All grown-ups are angry. It's just children and old people who laugh. Did you write that? Yes. What did your teacher say? She said I hadn't understood the task. And what did you say? I said she hadn't understood my answer. I love you, Grandpa manages to say with closed eyes. You're bleeding again, Noah says, with his hands on Grandpa's forearm. Grandpa wipes his forehand with a faded handkerchief. He's searching for something in his pockets. Then he looks at the boy's shoes, the way they swing a few inches above the tarmac with unruly shadows beneath them. When your feet touch the ground, I'll be in space, my dear Noah. The boy concentrates on breathing in time with Grandpa. That's another of their games. Are we here to learn how to say goodbye, Grandpa? He eventually asks. The old man scratches his chin, thinks for a long time. Yes, Noah, I'm afraid we are. I think goodbyes are hard, the boy admits. Grandpa nods and strokes his cheek softly, though his fingertips are as rough as dry suede. You get that from your grandma. Noah remembers. When his dad picked him up from Grandma and Grandpa's in the evenings, he wasn't even allowed to say those words to her. Don't say it, Noah. Don't you dare say it to me. I get old when you leave me. Every wrinkle on my face is a goodbye from you, she used to complain. And so he sang to her instead. And that made her laugh. She taught him to read and bake saffron buns and pour coffee without a pot dribbling. And when her hands started to shake, the boy taught himself to pour half cups so she wouldn't spill any, because she was always ashamed when she did, and he never let her feel ashamed in front of him. The amount I love you, Noah, she would tell him with her lips to his ear after she read fairy tales about elves and he was just about to fall asleep. The sky will never be that big. She wasn't perfect, but she was his. The boy sang to her the night before she died. Her body stopped working before her brain did. For Grandpa, it's the opposite. I'm bad at goodbyes, says the boy. Grandpa's lips reveal all his teeth when he smiles. We'll have plenty of chances to practice. You'll be good at it. Almost all grown adults walk around full of regret over a goodbye they wish they'd been able to go back and say better. Our goodbye doesn't have to be like that. You'll be able to keep redoing it until it's perfect. And once it's perfect, that's when your feet will touch the ground and I'll be in space and there won't be anything to be afraid of. Noah holds the old man's hand, the man who taught him to fish and to never be afraid of big thoughts and to look at the night sky and understand that it's made of numbers. Mathematics has blessed the boy in that sense because he's no longer afraid for the thing almost everyone else is terrified of, infinity. Noah loves space because it never ends. It never dies. It's the one thing in his life which won't ever leave him. He swings his legs, studies the glittering metal between the flowers. There are numbers on all the keys, Grandpa. Grandpa leans forward over the edge and calmly looks at them. Yes, indeed, there are. Why? I can't remember. He suddenly sounds so afraid. His body is heavy, his voice is weak, and his skin is a sail about to be abandoned by the wind. Why are you holding my hand so tight, Grandpa? The boy whispers again. Because of all of this disappearing, Noah. and I want to keep hold of you longest of all. The boy nods. He holds his grandpa's hand tighter in return. It is at this time in our service we light candles of joy and concern. When you see this video, if you choose to do so on Sunday, August 23rd, I will be celebrating distantly my parents' 56th anniversary. So I light this first candle for my parents, the grandparents of 12 grandchildren, in honor of all who have a reason to celebrate, even in this time of potential darkness. This next candle I light in honor of all who came before us and in all who struggled and overcame obstacles that might have torn them apart inside, yet they found the will to continue forward. This last candle I light in honor of all who will come after us, that we lay the foundation for, and for all who have something far too close to their heart to share at this time. So that we might together shine, by Eric Walker Wickstrom. When we light our chalice, everyone focuses on the flame, yet it is the paraffin of the candle, the cotton of the wick, the potassium chlorate and sulfur of the match, and the oxygen in the air around us that makes the flame possible. As leaders, we are not called to be a lone beacon on a hill. Rather, we are meant to work together so that we might together shine.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Our first responsive reading is number 190 from Lifting Our Voices by Antonio Machado. Mi corazón se ha dormido, colmenares de mis sueños ya no labráis. Está seca la noria del pensamiento, los cangilones vacíos, girando de sombra llenos. No, mi corazón no duerme, está despierto, despierto, ni duerme ni sueña, mira los claros ojos abiertos, señas lejanas y escucha a orillas del gran silencio.
Reading number 189. Has my heart gone to sleep? Have the beehives of my dreams stopped working? The water wheel of the mind run dry? Scoops turning empty, only shadow inside? No, My heart is not asleep. It is awake, wide awake, not asleep, not dreaming. Its eyes are opened wide, watching distant signals, listening on the rim of the vast silence. By Antonio Machado, translated by Alan S. Trueblood. Sharing our gifts and offerings. While we cannot be in person to pass the plate, we ask that members continue to turn in their pledges and that all of those watching please keep the congregation of First Unitarian Universalist Church in your hearts, and if possible, please donate to continue the work of this church. Lifting Our Voices, number 216. There are so many borders that divide people, but for every border, there is also a bridge. By Gina Valdez, translated by Catherine Callan King.
Grandparents, a journey across time. A preponderance of pondering. Ortiz streak, Nelson nose, Chavez height, Thoman skin. A story that saddens, a shared caution. An eyeball that fascinates, a place of learning, a smile that was never ending. The laugh that was inimitable. Hugs and heartache, wishes and wonderings, the echoes of my grandparents calling across the years. Freckled hands, curled over keys, back straight, head tilted, fleeting smile. Sheets turning, notes cascading around us, pausing to peer at the toddler by her side. She bends down, takes his hands, places them on the piano. He nods no. He takes her hands and gently puts them back. He wants her music, brilliant, joyous music. Music still remembered as it's not on the page. He knows it is music from the heart, the music of her soul. The quiet, serious-looking photo, the man staring back with purpose and wisdom, gently cradling his toddler with her glinting black curls, her joyous face, knowing she is loved. That love she will pass on to her toddlers and grand toddlers who will never know this man. The streak of white that curves my face, the shape of my body and the color of my eyes, the sternness in my tone, head thrown back with full-throated laughter, they are etched in my DNA and my memory. My great-grandparents, my grandparents, my touchstones to a past I can but relish or revile, as I am a bridge to the future they harbored, envisioned, and never saw. I am sure you've heard the anonymous saying that grandparents and grandchildren get along so well because they have a common enemy. Grandchildren have someone to turn to when a parent's strictures feel unwarranted and are definitely unwanted. Grandparents can finally love a child without having the burden and to burden themselves with day-to-day cares. Or at least that's how it's assumed to be. The bond that grandparents have with their grandchildren has been discussed and shared across time and across cultures. Scientific studies have shown us that it is not really that middle generation that is the issue. It's that the experiential differences of each of the generations, with none of the pesky inbuilt battles of parent versus child, that often leads to a harmonious health of secrets shared and memories made. Grandparents are allowed to be the gift givers, the spoilers, the non-judgmental adults in a child's life. Grandparents instill values, cultural and familial history, a sense of belonging and acceptance. There is an understanding between grandchildren and their grandparents that actually leads to better mental and emotional health. One can hypothesize that if the psychological health benefits, then the physical and spiritual health of grandparents and grandchildren should also be affected for the better. It is often viewed as one of the strongest relationships that can be found in a person's life, after that of the parent-child, and on par with those that are equal spouses. In fact, according to the American Grandparents Association, 72% of grandparents think being a grandparent is the single most important and satisfying thing in their lives. Now, not all grandparents in our society get the luxury of being able to give back the kids when they're done with them. Many grandparents are the sole providers and caretakers for their grandchildren. In the last mid-census gathering of information, at least 1/4 of the grandparents who were not sole providers still saw or cared for their grandchildren under the age of 5, at least weekly, if not more. Whether they are new parent or the visiting buddy, grandparents create positive developmental growth in their grandchildren. They are often more relaxed and confident than they were when they were parents. And despite the stereotype of a withered crone or a wrinkled, bent-over man, in 2015, the majority of grandparents in the United States were between the ages of 46 and 64. You know, it's not exactly a joke when I say that at 41, I gave birth to my own grandchild. In 2015 mid-census, it was estimated that there would be some 80 million grandparents by this year of 2020. Our new census will give us more insight into the number of children living with their grandparents, the number of grandparent caretakers, the number of grandparents that are still living, and the number of grandchildren that are thriving. It is no coincidence that our presidential election is a choice of 2 different types of grandfathers, at least as pointed out in one of the major parties' conventions this past week. No, Not all grandparents were created equal. Some are authoritarian and demanding. Others are prejudiced, priggish, and uptight. For the lucky among us, they are loving, generous, joyful, playful, and even inspiring. When I think of grandparents, there is such an overwhelming sense of joy and appreciation, a sense of recognition and acknowledgement, a knowing that I would be asked about my life and that the answers weren't meant to be pat and polite, but thoughtful and, if possible, profound. I was fortunate enough to have a good relationship with all the grandparents I grew up knowing. There was Grandpa Thoman, tall and austere looking, yet with the glass eyeball that gruesomely fascinated me. And yes, we great grandkids would pester him endlessly to take it out and put it in a glass. There was his wife, Grandma Thoman. A genealogist would say, "Not yours, as there is no sharing of DNA." But you can't tell that to my heart. I cannot ever remember Grandma Thoman not being exceedingly stylish and constantly smiling. She must have had reasons to frown, to cry, to hurt, but I never experienced them. So she'll eternally be in my memory as the sunshine grandparent with the pretty smelling hugs. There was my Nana and her complicated history with my mother. The story about when I behaved badly in front of her as a toddler and how my dad taught me that that wouldn't do because it reflected poorly on my mom in her mom's eyes. There were the annual visits to Southern California, sitting in her parlor before the afternoon's trip to the beach or the next day's sojourn to Disneyland. My Nana died on Mother's Day when my parents were watching me in my final stage performance in college. It was the only weekend they hadn't spent with her that entire year as she battled a blood disease. And I often think of how oddly our memories are intertwined with random streaks of nothingness. My streak of snow, as Nathaniel calls it, hails from Nana and the Ortizes. Or maybe she passed it on from the Mirabals, the Salazars, or the Isleta Pueblo. It gazes back at me from generations of women I will never know, and yet they have marked me as their own. Her husband, Michael John, my mother's father, was the grandparent I never knew. I like to ponder what he would be called. My paternal grandfather was Pop to all but his grandkids. To us, he was Grandpa. He was a bigger-than-life presence, and all that knew him loved him. I still hear from people who knew him as their teacher or their principal, or even still taught with him. They spin long reminiscences about what a compassionate and giving man he was, and I agree wholeheartedly. That was the man I knew too. 1988 is 32 years away on the calendar, but seconds ago, when I remember losing Nana in May and Grandpa in October. When I think of them, it inevitably leads me to conjure up the grandfather lost years before my birth. I miss the abuelo, or Gramps, or Grampy, or Papa, or whatever he would have chosen to be called. I miss the man who had an exceptional work ethic, the man who died too young in his mid-40s. I miss the man I only know from the stories that I dragged from my mother's lips, from the photos in a book. And yet I love him because he loved her. My mother was nurtured by her grandmother and her father. The readings in Spanish today are my tribute to them, as it was my mom's job to read the Psalms en Español to her Nana. They were two of the three forces that would arc her life into the one that she now shares with my father. I cannot help but love these people who made it possible for me to exist. Her big Nana and her teeny Nana, and all the stories about the people I would never know. Just as I love the 12 children that make my parents, grandparents, the ones who touch a future my parents can only imagine. It wasn't until after my graduation from college that I went from many grandparents to one. That last one would have turned 100 this year, and she has been ever present in my thoughts during 2020. My paternal grandma and grandpa loved technology, children, education, travel, and games. Grandma would have been all over the Zoom game nights that Nathaniel has set up for the cousins, and so that he can see his grandparents. If dementia hadn't robbed us of her mind before taking her body, Grandma would have been sharing substitution ingredients for those of us sheltering in place when Instacart hasn't done a good job. Or she would have been protesting along with the great-grandchildren the injustices that are no longer hidden, but shared in video across the land. She would have been incensed at what occurred to the post office because long after her retirement as a special ed teacher, she ended up as a postmistress in a rural town along the border. She might even genteelly cuss when thinking of those children at the border taken from their parents. And then she'd apologize quickly about it if it was to me, as she did once when she was talking about governmental abuses, because I'm her first granddaughter. The one she spoiled every Saturday with a trip to the San Joaquin County Library. Those are things I would like to think that she would do if we could have had her for 10 more years, but we didn't. The one last thing we had of her was her piano playing. When Nathaniel takes to the bench and he tickles the ivories, the sun slanting through his window brings out the shades of red in his hair, sent to him across the generations from my grandma and the grandfather I never knew. I cannot help but smile at how grandparents shape our lives in ways unexpected. In Richard Peck's A Long Way from Chicago, two grandchildren are sent to live with their grandmother. It is a novel for young people, yet it speaks eternally to all of us who have felt the loving presence of a grandparent. And I'm going to read you a short excerpt from The Troop Train, 1942. The years went by, and Mary Alice and I grew up, slower than we wanted to, faster than we realized. Another war came, World War II, and I wanted to get in it. The war looked like my chance to realize my old dream of flying. My soul began to swoop as it had all those years ago at the county fair when I'd had my first ride in Barney Buchanan's biplane, thanks to Grandma. I only hoped the war would last long enough to make a flyer out of me, and so it did. I joined up at Fort Sheridan for the Army Air Corps, but before I could go to flight school, I had to do basic training down at Camp Leonard Wood. On the night we were shipping out from Dearborn Station, it occurred to me that the troop train would pass through Grandma's town sometime in the night. I sent her a telegram. She never did have a phone. A telegram might give her a turn, but I just wanted to tell her the train would be going through town, though it wouldn't stop. In the way of troop trains, we left an hour late and sat on the siding outside Joliet for another hour. You don't get any sleep on a troop train. Our car was blue with smoke and noisy with a floating crap game. I sat through the long night, propped at the window. Then I knew we were getting to Grandma's town. It was sound asleep, in the hour before dawn. We slowed past the depot, and now we were coming to Grandma's, the last house in town. It was lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. Every window upstairs and down blazed, though she always turned out the light when she left a room. Now we were rolling past, and there was Grandma herself. She stood at her door, large as life, larger, framed against the light from her front room. Grandma was there, watching through the watches of the night for the train to pass through. She couldn't know what car I was in, but her hand was up and she was waving big at all the cars, hoping I'd see. And I waved back. I waved long after the window filled with darkness and long distance. Whether you are recalling your grandparents, awaiting your first grandchild, or inspiring others as a grandparental figure, I hope that your memories bring you more smiles than tears, more heart warmth than heartbreak, and that there is a serenity and calmness that wends through your day. May you be able to leave the light on, wave with abandon, and know without seeing that the love is felt and returned across time and space, life and death, knowing and imagining. May it be so. Salam, shalom, blessed be, namaste, and amen. Go in peace.